Did you know that 1 in every 4 cowboys was black? Few images embody the spirit of the American West, as well as the trailblazing, sharpshooting, horseback-riding cowboy of American lore. And though African American cowboys don't play a part in the popular narrative, historians estimate that 25% of cowboys were in fact black. The cowboy lifestyle came into its own in Texas, which had been cattle country since it was colonized by Spain in the 1500s. But cattle farming did not become the bountiful economic and cultural phenomenon recognized today until the late 1800s, when millions of cattle grazed in Texas. White Americans seeking cheap land, and sometimes evading debt in the United States, began moving to the Spanish and later Mexican territory of Texas during the first half of the 19th century. Though the Mexican government opposed slavery, Americans brought slaves with them as they settled the frontier and established cotton farms and cattle ranches. By 1825, slaves accounted for nearly 25% of the Texas settler population. By 1860, 15 years after it became part of the Union, that number had risen to over 30%. That year's census reported 100,566 slaves living in Texas. As an increasingly significant new slave state, Texas joined the Confederacy in 1861. Though the Civil War hardly reached Texas soil, many white Texans took up arms to fight alongside their brethren in the East. While Texas ranchers fought in the war, they depended on their slaves to maintain their land and cattle herds. In doing so, the slaves developed the skills of cattle tending, breaking horses, pulling calves out of mud, and releasing longhorns caught in the brush, to name a few, that would render them invaluable to the Texas cattle industry in the post-war era. But with a combination of a lack of effective containment, barbed wire was not yet invented, and too few cowhands, the cattle population ran wild. Ranchers returning from the war discovered that their herds were lost or out of control. They tried to round up the cattle and rebuild their herds with slave labor, but eventually the Emancipation Proclamation left them without the free workers on which they were so dependent. Desperate for help rounding up maverick cattle, ranchers were compelled to hire now free, skilled African Americans as paid cowhands. Freed blacks, skilled in herding cattle, found themselves in greater demand when ranchers began selling their livestock in northern states, where beef was nearly 10 times more valuable than it was in cattle-inundated Texas. The lack of significant railroads in the state meant that enormous herds of cattle needed to be physically moved to shipping points in Kansas, Colorado, and Missouri. Rounding up herds on horseback, cowboys traversed unforgiving trails fraught with harsh environmental conditions and attacks from Native Americans defending their lands. Right after the Civil War, being a cowboy was one of the few jobs open to men of color who wanted to not serve as elevator operators or delivery boys or other similar occupations, says William Loren Katz, a scholar of African American history and the author of 40 books on the topic, including The Black West. African American cowboys faced discrimination in the towns they passed through. They were barred from eating at certain restaurants or staying in certain hotels, for example. But within their crews, they found respect and a level of equality unknown to other African Americans of the era. The West was a vast open space and a dangerous place to be, says Katz. Cowboys had to depend on one another. They couldn't stop in the middle of some crisis like a stampede or an attack by rustlers and sort out who's black and who's white. Black people operated on a level of equality with the white cowboys, he says. The cattle drives ended by the turn of the century. Railroads became a more prominent mode of transportation in the West, barbed wire was invented, and Native Americans were relegated to reservations, all of which decreased the need for cowboys on ranches. This left many cowboys, particularly African Americans who could not easily purchase land, in a time of rough transition. Though opportunities to become a working cowboy were on the decline, the public's fascination with the cowboy lifestyle prevailed, making way for the popularity of Wild West shows and rodeos. Bill Pickett invented bulldogging, a rodeo technique to wrestle a steer to the ground. Corbus Bill Pickett, born in 1870 in Texas to former slaves, became one of the most famous early rodeo stars. He dropped out of school to become a ranch hand and gained an international reputation for his unique method of catching stray cows. Modeled after his observations of how ranch dogs caught wandering cattle, Pickett controlled a steer by biting the cow's lip, subduing him. He performed his trick, called bulldogging or steer wrestling, for audiences around the world with the Miller Brothers 101 Wild Ranch show. He drew applause and admiration from young and old, cowboy to city slicker, remarks Katz. In 1972, 40 years after his death, Pickett became the first black honoree in the National Rodeo Hall of Fame, and rodeo athletes still compete in a version of his event today. And he was just the beginning of a long tradition of African American rodeo cowboys. African American cowboys may still be underrepresented in popular accounts of the West, but the work of scholars such as Katz and rodeo stars like Pickett keep the memories and undeniable contributions of the early African American cowboys alive. If you enjoyed learning about these cowboys, like the video, check out our channel and subscribe for more revelations from your nearby historian.